All right, guys, this is RotoViz Live, and this is the episode for Kansas on Saturday, May 12th. I'm pretty excited for this Kansas race. I think it sets up very nicely for DFS this weekend. I think, I just think it's a really, really interesting weekend with what happened in qualifying, with what happened, obviously, to Kyle Larson getting moved to the back because he spun out in qualifying. There was some inspection issues. There was a few drivers who didn't make laps in second qualifying. Like I said, Larson spun. Jamie McMurray had some issues. Jimmy Johnson elected not to go out in second qualifying. So there's some obviously some plays there, and then some big names starting at the front as well. Kevin Harvick, Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch starting 1, 2, 3. So we're gonna get into all of your questions here. And right off the bat, can you talk about what to do with Matt Kenseth? How do you see this race playing out for him? Can you compare him with the likes of McMurray and Austin Dillon, all at sort of similar price points? I think that's a really good question. Talked about him on the pod, of course, Matt Kenseth. And, I think for Matt Kenseth this week, it will probably be a struggle. He talked about going into the week, he didn't really know what to expect. Of the 22 cars that made a 10-lap average, he was 22nd, so not very good. Didn't show a ton of speed in single-lap qualifying as well. Starting way in the back, and like I said on the podcast, I'm regressing about 75% the team average of Roush, 25% Kenseth's history, so that way it kind of regresses it to the team as much as possible, and then it can be influenced by Kenseth's past performance. And he does have a good Kansas history, but unfortunately, it seems this weekend he doesn't have a handle of the car very well. Like I said, 22nd out of 22, made a 10-lap average. That said, he is starting 35th. He will come forward almost surely, so he's not a horrible play. Then, you look at the likes of somebody else like Jamie McMurray, 20th in 10-lap average out of 22 cars, so better than Kenseth, certainly better than Kenseth, but I think less place differential potential there for Jamie McMurray. Austin Dillon, you look at him, he starts 25th. His 10-lap average was 19th, so right around the same area as Jamie McMurray. Maybe you like Austin Dillon a little bit more than McMurray, just because obviously with that one extra spot of place differential and potential, I should say, and that one extra little bit of I guess speed and practice, in the 10-lap average there, maybe end up liking Austin Dillon just a touch more than Jamie McMurray this weekend. They're pretty neck and neck. I mean, my model gives them essentially the same finishing position, but likes both of them a lot more than Matt Kenseth. The big difference, of course, is Kenseth starts 11 spots or 10 spots further back and is a bit cheaper. So he will draw a lot more ownership. I do think McMurray and Dillon are interesting pivots off of Kenseth in GPPs, however, but I think you'll probably be using plenty of Kenseth this week just because he didn't end up qualifying this weekend. So that's kind of where I stand on Matt Kenseth this weekend. Going on to the next question here, let's flip through. What should our max ownership percentage be on guys like Daniel Suarez or Eric Jones? So I wrote up both Suarez and Jones in my article. I think you can probably go up to like 25%, 30% on these drivers if you feel you like them. Obviously, I think they're good picks, so I wrote them up, which means I would want to be personally overweight to the field. The field projects around 20% on each of them, 22 for Suarez, 18 for Eric Jones. I don't mind if you go a little bit overweight on them for sure. That's why I wrote them up. I like them both as plays this weekend. With Suarez, you're getting a driver who is $6,800, who has top 12 potential, and even higher than top 12 potential possibly there. So definitely like Suarez, maybe 30%, something like that. Eric Jones up to 25% would be maybe my preferred ownership percentage range this weekend for those drivers right there. One other thing I did want to point out in terms of the 10-lap averages for Kenseth versus McMurray versus Dillon, Kenseth was a full mile an hour slower than McMurray, whereas McMurray was only a 1/10 of a mile an hour slower than Dillon. So like McMurray and Dillon are essentially a wash. Kenseth definitely slower, and probably doesn't have as much place differential potential or I should say probably won't finish higher than McMurray or Dillon, barring any major problems for McMurray or Dillon. But again, the issue there is place differential potential. He has more place differential potential than McMurray or Dillon, but doesn't seem to be running very fast this weekend. Are you considering 100% of anyone this weekend? No, I'm not playing this weekend. Taking this weekend off, but if I was, I would possibly consider 100% Harvick. The issue there, of course, is the incident rate at Kansas is 17.5%. So you probably don't want to be 100% on anyone if you want to kind of go GTO, but if you want to be exploitative, you can absolutely go 100% on somebody like Harvick. I don't think it really makes much sense to go 100% on anyone else. We don't know if Kyle Larson will come forward enough. We don't know if Kyle Busch will end up being a second dominator. Maybe you could say something like Clint Boyer or either Michael McDowell or Matt DiBenedetto back there, starting way back there, could be pretty highly owned for you. But I don't think you need to go 100% on anyone this weekend. I mean, things still happen. This is NASCAR, right? You can get a speeding penalty late in the race. There could be a crash that you're involved in. You could blow an engine. You could blow a tire. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen in NASCAR DFS. So, I mean, if you're mass multi-entering, you're probably not going 100% on anyone. If you're doing 10 lineups, sure, if you want to go 100% on someone, that's fine. But if you're playing like 100 lineups, probably doesn't make sense to go 100% on anyone. Hashtag RV Live. The place differential guys set it up as a 1 dominator race, but the winning lineups at Kansas lately have been 2 dominators. How important is it to have 2 this weekend? That's a really good question. I'm kind of torn between 1 and 2 dominators. The reason I like 1 dominator this weekend is because A, it is Kevin Harvick starting on the pole. We saw what he did at Las Vegas, leading over 80% of the laps. And B, there are plenty of good place differential plays, like the guys that didn't qualify, the guys that didn't qualify in round 2, which was McMurray, Johnson, Larson. You've got Alex Bowman in 19th potential place differential. Chase Elliott in 17th place differential potential. There's plenty of relatively high-priced guys, all the way up to high-priced guys who are in play this weekend. So I do kind of like a 1 dominator lineup, but that said, history shows 2 dominators is the way to go at Kansas more often than not. So I certainly like 2 dominator lineups. If you want to go Harvick Blaney, Harvick Busch, if you want to go Harvick, maybe something happens with strategy and either like Logano or Truex gets involved or something like that. I definitely don't mind these plays at all. So I think that's kind of where I'm going this weekend is 1 dominator with Harvick and then 2 dominators with any 2 drivers there. But certainly, obviously, Harvick is the play this weekend. Hashtag RV Live. Let me go to the latest questions here. For some reason, they're sorting funny. One second here. There we go. Back to where we were. Question for Cash Game. Sacrifice a potential second dominator in order to get the place differential from Larson, or can you make it through the field for both? Wrote that up in my article. Talked about it on the podcast. I like Larson. Play Larson and Cash. Hashtag RB Live. Can you talk about Buescher versus DiBenedetto versus McDowell? Model has Buescher with a finishing position of 16 and sim scores having 13.5 median. Will we get more points from Buescher or McDowell and Matt DiBenedetto? Well, if you look at the model tells you right there points. And so the model shows that shoot, I just realized my ownership percentages are a bit off. Let me re-upload the table here while I'm recording this. But so I'm gonna go to table press, import to table. So looking at the looking at the model here, you see Michael McDowell projects for around 22, DiBenedetto around 24.5, Buescher around 16. However, because of place differential factoring in, you can calculate those points. Buescher projects around 23 DraftKings points, whereas McDowell around 36 and DiBenedetto around 32. So McDowell is the best play this weekend of those 3, just because of the massive place differential potential. Yeah, I mean, he's also got a pretty decent car, so I certainly like Michael McDowell as the best among that trio there. That said, Chris Buescher does have some interesting finishes at Kansas. He's run well there, he's finished well there, so certainly I think Buescher is in play in GPPs. If you look at the NASCAR Splits app, give me 1 second to pull that up here with Chris Buescher in regards to Kansas. But 2017, his average finish is 12th, right? And that's over 2 Kansas races last year. So pretty solid average finish there. And that's when he started 20th. So if he finishes 12th again this weekend, that would be even more points. You'd have to add another 8 points. That would put him at 31. That puts him right in the Matt DiBenedetto range. So he could be a very interesting pivot off of DiBenedetto or McDowell, but I wouldn't go crazy on Buescher. Certainly McDowell is the best play of the three. DiBenedetto second, Buescher third. But absolutely in some lineups, if you want to get away from either DiBenedetto or McDowell and get on Buescher, I don't mind that at all. If he finishes with a 10th place finish, you're looking at a driver who will get 34 points just for finishing position, and then is only $5,800. So that's plenty of points for a driver at $5,800. But I wouldn't go crazy on him. Maybe 15%, something like that, for Chris Buescher there. For me, if I were to multi-enter this weekend. Next question, #RVLive. Thoughts on fading the 18 with the theory that Harvick dominates enough to make the place differential plays a better option this week? I certainly think that's a very real possibility with Kevin Harvick just running away with things. Definitely he could just rule the whole first stage, for example. The issue there, of course, is there are times where maybe there's cautions and Harvick has a pit issue, as the team has been prone to do, and that could allow a second dominator in there. There will be stage cautions. There will possibly be other cautions, and they haven't been the best pit crew this year, so certainly there's some possibility for a second dominator, but I think in the end Harvick is still the car to beat. The issue would be if somebody like Kyle Busch got out front. It's going to be pretty hard for Harvick to pass Kyle Busch. I mean, I know it's easier to pass here than maybe Dover last weekend, but still think there's a real chance somebody like Kyle Busch gets out front. Maybe even somebody like outside the box, like Aric Almirola, ends up leading some laps here. He had some great practice times. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Kevin Harvick is the guy here and could lead enough laps, 60, 70, 80% of the race, that it saps up all of the other possible dominator points and makes place differential the play of this weekend. So one dominator with place differential. Next question, #RVLive, Reagan versus Ty versus Bubba. So this is an interesting range here because we've got Ty Dillon starting 26th, Bubba Wallace starting 21st, and David Reagan starting 20th. You look at their 10-lap averages, not very good. Not very good for some of these drivers. Only David Reagan made a 10-lap average, I should say. His was 17th. But then Bubba Wallace and Ty Dillon did not make 10-lap averages. So we don't really have a ton of data to go by on these drivers. David Reagan, 17th out of 22, not terrible, but you wonder where he would be had the other 16 cars made 10-lap averages. So tough to play David Reagan. Bubba Wallace, like for example, if you look at the Splits app this year and you look at the large ovals, we can compare the three of them. So we go to driver rating here and sort by salary, and we've got Darrell Wallace Jr. with a 57.1 driver rating, Ty Dillon with a 47.6 driver rating this year in the large ovals, not very good at all, and David Reagan 47.2. So I think there's a very clear edge to Darrell Wallace Jr. here. Even if we remove DNFs, I think it's still in favor of Darrell Wallace Jr. They're actually David Reagan and Ty Dillon and Darrell Wallace Jr. all get the same driver rating, so none of them have a DNF on large ovals this year. So for me, Darrell Wallace Jr. is the play. I know he's 6,100 this weekend. Reagan's 6,000 and Ty Dillon's 5,700. But I just feel like Darrell Wallace Jr. with his performance so far this year has the best car, and the model likes him the best as well of the three, giving him 28 DraftKings points, and while the other two get around 26 DraftKings points. So if it's a toss-up between the three of them, I would go with Darrell Wallace Jr. among the three. Hashtag RB Live. Can you talk through Larson versus Kyle Busch a bit more? I want to play Larson, but I'm having a hard time playing any Chevy. I definitely think that people are getting on me about the BJ McLeod ownership percentage. It was just an error because McLeod's not actually available on DraftKings, so just shift everything down one. But I've already fixed it. So I'll just reply to some people here. Yeah, so talking through Kyle Larson, him going into the rear changes nothing. It's Kansas. You can pass here. You know, it's still maybe a little more difficult to pass than we'd like. But, you know, I'm not worried about Kyle Larson going to the rear. But if some people are, I mean, I've got asked this question already 4 or 5 times. Larson starting in the rear. What about Larson going to the rear? Does Larson in the rear change anything? People are concerned about it. Some people will get off of him. No thoughts on Larson's previous track history. I think people are scared of Larson right now, scared of the fact that he spun out, scared of the fact that the Chevys aren't doing a whole lot. If that lowers his ownership percentage any, I definitely want to be on Larson. Talking through Larson versus Kyle Busch, at least in cash games for me, I prefer Kyle Larson. You get a $600 savings, which allows you to do a little bit more with your lineup, especially on a weekend where Kevin Harvick is a very obvious play, and then Clint Boyer at 9,000 is an obvious cash game play. That $600 will let you do some things with your lineup. There's no guarantee Kyle Busch leads this race, given how probably dominant Harvick will be. And when you compare practice times, over 10-lap average or 15-lap average, Larson and Kyle Busch are neck and neck. So, I think Larson, if you like Kyle Busch, you should like Kyle Larson, right? Kyle Larson actually was 0.3 of a mile an hour faster over 10 laps and over 20 laps or over 15 laps. It's kind of unclear with what Fox tweeted out, but it looked like Larson may have actually been faster on the 15-lap average as well. I'm not totally positive there. They said Busch was 1, Larson 2, but then showed the times where Larson was actually at a faster time than Busch. So it's a little confusing, but essentially they're neck and neck. And so if you like Kyle Busch, you should also like Kyle Larson here. I know track history, people talk about track history at Kansas. Don't think about track history. Think about type history, right? Large oval history, especially what they've done at large ovals this year. We look at the large ovals this year. Kyle Busch, 120 driver rating. Kyle Larson, 108. So yeah, there's a nod there for Kyle Busch, certainly. And he gets the better starting position, but it's not that vastly different. And it's not different enough where, we think he's going to overcome Kevin Harvick very significantly. I think Kevin Harvick certainly is the guy this weekend who's probably going to lead maybe the whole first segment, at least all the way up until the first caution, you would think. So you don't need Kyle Busch in cash this week. Take Kyle Larson, take the safety, take the place differential, and you're getting a car that's just as good as Kyle Busch's. You got 400 miles here. Kyle Larson will be up front by the end of 400 miles, barring some problems, right? He does have a top 3 car there. He gets to start on fresh tires, or at least one fresh tire. I've seen what the ruling there is, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer for me in terms of cash games that I'd rather have Larson than Busch. In GPPs, bit closer. Obviously, with the problems that Kevin Harvick has had in the pits, his crew has had, I should say, there's definitely a real possibility Kyle Busch leads some laps. And so I do like Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson much more neck and neck in GPPs than I did in cash games. So, I think it's really a toss-up there, and you just want to have exposure to both. The ownership percentages on each are Larson 39, Kyle Busch 31. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. So there isn't, for me, I prefer Larson this weekend because you get a lot more place differential, and there's no guarantee Kyle Busch will lead. That's kind of what it comes down to for me in the end, just to kind of simplify things. So Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to these RotoViz live questions. I'm just flipping here through Twitter, and it's funny how people are like getting on this BJ McLeod thing. It should be pretty obvious, guys. BJ McLeod's not available on DraftKings. I accidentally copy-pasted and stuffed it in there. So just move everybody from BJ McLeod. Their ownership percentage is down one, but I've already fixed it anyway. So, yeah. Hashtag RV Live. This is an interesting question. How many drivers starting in the top 10 will be in the winning lineup? I think probably a few. Definitely Kevin Harvick and or Kyle Busch. That's 2 right there. Possibly somebody like Almirola or Blaney. I think Logano is a good bet to be in the winning lineup. There's a chance Chris Buescher, could end up in the winning lineup. Certainly can never rule out somebody like Keselowski or Truex. So I would say probably 2 to 3 drivers starting in the top 10. The issue here this weekend is all of the place differential plays means it's probably less likely that it's 3 and more likely that it's maybe 2 or something like that. Just because you've got Clint Bowyer, Kasey Kahne, Matt Kenseth, Michael McDowell, Matt DiBenedetto that all did not make laps. And you're going to need some cheaper drivers in the winning lineup, and you've got a couple of cheaper names back there, like Kahne, DiBenedetto, McDowell, and then you've also got Bowyer, for example. So those guys, at least 2 or 3 of those guys will end up in the winning lineup, but you'd think there's a chance Kyle Larson does, or somebody like McMurray, or maybe an Austin Dillon. But yeah, I think... and again, there's also a chance even somebody like Chase Elliott starting 17th ends up in the winning lineup. And then I like Suarez and Jones. So it's tough. 1 to 2, maybe 3, but probably 2 drivers starting inside the top 10 end up in the winning lineup would be my best guess. Hashtag RB Live. Are McDowell and DiBenedetto leading the Joe Dirt crew? Yep, talked about them on the pod. Those are the top 2 for the Joe Dirt crew. No brainers there. I will say Kasey Kahne at 6,300 is very interesting. He projects to finish higher than both of them in terms of raw finishing position, but maybe just barely. I think some of that is influenced by his Hendrick history. So, but I do think he's interesting back there as well. He's not a Joe Dirt driver per se, but he is also interesting this weekend in GPPs. If everybody's going to be on McDowell and DiBenedetto, and Kane's only going to be 15% owned as the model projects, I think 20% on Kane, something like that. 25% is a very prudent move. I still want to get my, I would still get plenty of McDowell and DiBenedetto exposure, but I think Kane will probably be under-owned of this tier back here. And really the guy who could be under-owned is maybe Matt Kenseth at $7,100 if people are just playing the price point game. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking this weekend is basically McDowell and DiBenedetto smash. You can throw in some Landon Castle, as I talked about on the podcast as well. Hashtag RB Live. Because it's a night race, how do practice times transfer over to the night? And thoughts on Larson's previous track history? Really good question. The practice times don't translate as much. I think it is an interesting weekend to fade 10-lap and 15-lap averages a bit, especially just because we only had 22 drivers make 10-lap runs out of 38. Then you also have the fact that it was the only practice session, so teams will be working on their cars during the race, getting them better and better during the race. And you got the transition from day into night. Practice was during the day. It was in the later portion of the day. It was getting cooler, but it's not in the night. So this is an interesting weekend to fade practice times a little bit. Now, obviously, 10-lap, 15-lap are very important at Kansas, and you don't want to completely disregard them. But somebody like Paul Menard, who's showing up there in the 15-lap average as the best, as 10th best, I think is kind of false and misleading. There weren't 38 cars that made 15-lap averages. Paul Menard, was essentially 10th out of the 10 we saw, and there weren't any more than 22 because only 22 made 10-lap averages. We know Harvick didn't make a 10-lap average, so that at least would put Menard down to 11th, things like that. So, there's some merit to fading some of the 10-lap averages, but or even the longer runs. But certainly, I wouldn't get caught up in single lap speed. I'm not even looking at single lap speed this weekend, so that's where I stand on single laps. Next question, hashtag RV Live. Almirola versus Kez versus Logano ranking for GPP. I like Logano 1, Almirola 2, and Keselowski 3. I think Almirola has a better car than Keselowski based off of course, I'm going to go to practice times here, but that's really all we have to go by is practice times. So I do like Eric Almirola versus Keselowski. I think Almirola has some sneaky dominator potential, right? He made the third best 15 lap average, whereas Keselowski was plenty slower. He only had the 8th best 10 lap average. So, there's a significant difference there between the two. And then, you look at 10 lap speed as well. I'm flipping over to the 10 lap. Give me 1 second here. You look at 10 lap speed, again, third for Almirola, and Keselowski was way down there, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th. So, and you look at the mile an hour difference, basically a whole mile an hour. So definitely Almirola for me. So Logano 1, Almirola 2, Keselowski 3. And I actually think it's very close between Logano and Almirola for 1, 2. I just like Logano's track history here, as well as his type history this year. It is better than Almirola so far in 2018. Logano, a 104.2 driver rating at the large ovals in completed races, in incident-free races. Almirola only 79.5. So that's kind of the tiebreaker there for me between the two. Is Logano just outperforming Almirola at the large ovals this year very easily, but doesn't have, I think, a horrible car, whereas it's even better than his teammate's car, Brad Keselowski's. So that's why it puts him a little closer to Almirola for me. And then you also add in the track history. I like Logano 1, Almirola 2, and then Brad Keselowski 3. So that's where I'd rank him for GPPs this weekend. Really good question there. Hashtag RV Live, what negative correlation plays do you see outside of playing more than 1 to 2 dominators? I guess negative correlation would be really any other 2 dominators besides Kevin Harvick probably negatively correlate, right? If somebody else ends up leading and it's not Harvick, they're taking away that leading opportunity from everybody else because we know Harvick's probably going to dominate a good portion of the race here. I do think, somebody like Almirola and Blaney could have negative correlation unless somehow Blaney jumps Harvick on the initial start. But I do think there's a chance, it's very unlikely both Blaney and Almirola end up dominating portions of the race here. And they're going to be competing with each other as well for finishing position. And they're neck and neck in both like price and starting position and ownership, projection and all that. So I think there is some negative correlation there. Outside of that, there isn't a whole lot of negative correlation. I guess if you get something like, the Joe Dirt Cheaps here, then if you're playing a McDowell and a DiBenedetto, I guess you're probably not playing somebody like a Landon Castle or a Chastain or a Corey LaJoie or something like that. So, it's tough to say just because like finishing position there isn't as much negative correlation in finishing position. When we talk negative correlation, we're really talking about how are you affecting each other's upside. And most of the upside comes from dominators. There's room inside the top 5 for 5 drivers, right? So, whereas there isn't room for 5 dominators this weekend. So really when we talk negative correlation, we mostly are just talking about dominators. So, yeah, I think we're getting to the end of the questions here. Let me scroll through and see if I'm missing anything. Oh, Larson versus Jimmy Johnson versus Chase. Easily Larson number 1 for me. If we look at Jimmy Johnson versus Chase Elliott, I actually like Chase Elliott second. Just been better this year at the large ovals overall than Jimmy Johnson. 78.3 driver rating versus 72 driver rating. Yeah, for me, it would be Chase Elliott over Jimmy Johnson. Then you also can add in, I guess, Kansas history, which recent history has been favorable for Chase Elliott at Kansas. Let me refresh the Splits app here, and we'll pull up the Kansas Speedway history. But again, I don't like going too much into driver history at a specific track. But Chase Elliott, 85.3. Jimmy Johnson, where is he? 97.4, but let's remove the DNFs and change the filter to the last 2 years. I still got Jimmy Johnson at 90 and Chase at 85.3, so kind of a wash. So let's go over to practice. Jimmy Johnson did not make a 10-lap average. I like Chase Elliott. I think he just has more upside just in general. Let's go over to the sim scores. Maybe going to the sim scores will change my mind. But you know, my initial gut reaction was Chase, but now I'm kind of doubting myself as we talk through this. Sim scores, including DNFs, 7, 11.5, and 20 for Chase. Jimmy 13, 25, in basically a floor of crashing out. The sim scores are not very high on Jimmy Johnson this week, so I think I still like Chase Elliott a lot more than I like Jimmy Johnson. But there you have it. I think it's Chase Elliott for me over Jimmy Johnson. But in that regard, but obviously Kyle Larson number one out of those drivers very easily. But yeah, I think that's about it. I'm looking at the questions here and I don't see any more. When will ownership percentage projections be out? They're already out now. So that's going to do it for this weekend's edition. Make sure you check out the podcast as well. I talk about, Larson, I talk about Eric Jones, Daniel Suarez as plays I like. I wrote them up as well. I like the guys starting in the back, of course, with Casey Kane, Matt Kenseth, DiBenedetto, McDowell, obviously Clint Boyer. Those are all very much in play. All of those drivers are in play just because they're starting in the back and they can come forward. And then you've got that mid-range there with McMurray, Austin Dillon, Jimmy Johnson, Larson. There's some names there that are very playable. Chase Elliott is very playable. And then like I said, I like Jones and Suarez. I really like Suarez. I like fading Menard. I talked about that. And I need to get to my Menard play of the week. So let me flip over here to the ownership percentage projections. I like to give you guys somebody who's a little bit lower owned. I do think Casey Kane is a really nice Menard play of the week. And then I think I actually kind of like flipping through here. I like Eric Almirola as a Menard play of the week. I think he could probably be pretty under-owned given the way roster construction will go this weekend. He's got a top 3-5 car. If he could parlay that into some potential dominance, which a lot of people may not see coming, if Harvick has a pit problem and somehow he gets out of the pits in front of Kyle Busch, I think that's pretty sneaky there. I wouldn't go crazy, 15% Almirola, something like that. I think he's going to be maybe down around 8 to 10%. I think the model might be a little higher on him. Model says 13.8% Almirola, but I think Blaney will absorb some of that ownership percentage in that price range more than Almirola will. So I actually think he's going to go under 13.8%. But don't go crazy on him. 15% max, I would say, on him. But I do like him, and but really, I think Daniel Suarez is maybe my favorite GPP play this weekend. I just think he could be really consistent like he was last weekend. He has a car that's probably better than 14th, maybe top 12, top 10, something like that. And he's $6,800, and you get a driver who's top 12 at $6,800, it's going to pay off the price tag very easily, right? I mean, the model projects him at 36 DraftKings points. That's already over 5x just from the model projections. So Daniel Suarez, my favorite, but I think in the back, Casey Kane is a very good, air quote, Paul Menard pick of the week. And all the way up front, Eric Almirola is a driver I like as well. So there you go. I think that's going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Live. Good luck to everybody this weekend. Kind of a weird weekend just because there's a really obvious core of drivers. So I would mostly stick to that core and then sprinkle in some of these really contrarian plays like Almirola sparingly, but still get them in there. I would ignore plenty of drivers this weekend. You're ignoring guys like AJ Allmendinger probably. You're ignoring guys maybe like Ryan Newman this weekend, who's higher priced but probably doesn't have as much finishing position potential as somebody like Eric Jones or Daniel Suarez. Obviously, even though Eric Jones is higher priced as well, he has better finishing position potential in a head-to-head there. So yeah, pretty small core of drivers this weekend, and then sprinkle in, I would say with the chalky drivers, and then sprinkle in some contrarian plays here and there. That's going to do it. Good luck this weekend, guys, and I hope one of y'all takes down the big one this weekend.